What's going on, world? Welcome to my podcast. It's just different with Ty, where I talk about sports, social, political issues, you name it, everything under the sun. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, all right, so you can get updated on the latest news videos. And today, I have a very special guest with me today. I got to shout out to my brother Kwame for making this happen.
Kwame.
So today I have Miss Lisa. So introduce the world to you and let the world know who you are.
Welcome to It's Just Different with your host, Ty.
Okay. My name is Lisa Davis, and I have been, I don't really like to use the term community activist, but I have been a student of the Black liberation struggle for quite a while. And I realized that as a Black person, that is the only way to live. I am, from New Jersey. And some years ago, when I first graduated college, I found myself confronted with issues involving police brutality, and I was completely unprepared for that. And although they did not physically hit me, the encounter was very abusive. It was a very violent encounter over something so ridiculous. And at that time, when I had first graduated from college, I graduated thinking that I had played my part. I did my part. I was involved in the Black Student Union. And now that I had graduated, it was time for me to focus on my career. And I wasn't even thinking about reconnecting with the Black liberation struggle. And I saw that was a mistake. And I saw through this horrible experience that the state protected the police, the state, the court. I mean, I went as far as I could go with this case. And I went through the court systems. I mean, the Attorney General office in the state of New Jersey, they all were siding with the police. And even more importantly, the horrible cases that they were bringing before me to buttress their case, to support their case, that the police, and this also involved the New Jersey Transit conductor, that anybody who worked for the state, that they were untouchable and that they had the right to do whatever they wanted. They could write up false police reports, and that basically they were protected by the state. And I was seeing some of the most outrageous court cases or examples from court cases that they were showing to justify what was going on, instead of dealing with it, instead of correcting the abuse, because I could surely prove that I was telling the truth. It wasn't even a case of my word against theirs, because the Attorney General for the state of New Jersey, who was Deborah Porridge at that time, argued that even if what I said was true, that they are the state and they are immune from liability. So if they're going to argue that, so what if I'm telling the truth? It's not about the truth. It's about the state, that they are protected. And I learned from that case that I needed to be connected to the community. I needed to be connected to the Black liberation struggle, which is our social immune system. And also at that time when that happened, because it happened on a public platform on a New Jersey Transit train. And I remembered that I understood a lot of people didn't know what had happened or who was right or who was wrong. And I remembered that people were on the train and they sat back and they did nothing. And I didn't blame them for that, because they did not know who was right or who was wrong. They, was just watching the middle of something happening. But I looked at that and said to myself, there was even still a better way for them to have handled it. Somebody should have said something. You see this white man going off on me and nobody's saying anything. So, like I said, I didn't really blame them, but I was saying to myself, we have to be conditioned differently. We have to see things differently. And so the upshot of that, or the long shot of that, is that I had to become what I was looking for in terms of activism. I saw that being involved and being connected to the Black liberation struggle was about our survival. You know, I didn't have a choice. There was not this protection in society that I thought that there was. And this was over something that was nothing, something you couldn't even anticipate that you were going to find yourself involved in. You know, it just involved a ticket, a train ticket on the New Jersey Transit train. I had to go one stop over, but my ticket that I had purchased had covered the fare, had covered the zone and had covered the fare of where I was going, but I just had to go one stop over. It was the exact same price. And at that time, this was before there were all these cell phones and everything, and before you could, purchase your tickets electronically and online. So the train station was closed and I had bought all these tickets in advance. So over something like that, over something that was basically minuscule, over something that should have never escalated to the way that it did, with the police cursing me out in Milburn. It was in an all-white town where I was going at that time because my temp agency was in that town, with them cursing me out, with them basically abusing me, although they did not physically hit me. But that should have never been like that. So I learned, and when I saw that the state just making excuses, just protecting them, the state, the court system, they had called me a liar, a mental case, a thief, an effing liar. They admitted to this in their court documentation. They said I had been arrested before and that I admitted to having been arrested. I could easily disprove that didn't happen. But still, it didn't matter. They were the state, and the Attorney General's office came out on their side completely and even argued that there was nothing unconstitutional if anybody worked for the state to write a false police report or to call somebody a nigger. I'm going to say that word because that's what they said to me. They put it in writing. And so that just really began my commitment to the Black liberation struggle. It was also about my survival and about creating the world that I wanted to live in, because this was not an option. And although I hate what happened to me, but I do not at all regret my choice to be very connected always to the Black liberation struggle. And that's what everybody should be connected to, because as Black people living in the United States, it wasn't voting, it wasn't this or that, it wasn't the kindness of, white people. And I'm not saying that there were not white people who were not about justice and who did not stand up. But for the most part, it was about our determination, our fight for freedom. That is what has always, that is what has always given us any protection. If we were going to have any protection at all, it came from that movement. It did not come from this system. And certainly relying on a system that is built on genocide, colonialism, racism. I'm going to use the term, I use the term colonialism a lot, but many times that is referring to what a lot of people are talking about. They're talking about they're fighting against racism. What they're really fighting against is colonialism, this system. And so, that is really the only way to live in this country as Black people, and also globally, because it is a global fight. So that sort of brings me to where I am today. Although I had always been very, very proud to be Black, I considered myself always to be a part of the Black liberation struggle, so to speak, although I didn't know what that meant. I really didn't know what that meant. I was just like, well, I'm proud to be Black, no matter what, But I would really learn I would learn that I would have to go way beyond just being proud to be Black. But that's sort of my background in a nutshell. And if it wasn't for this racist colonialist system, I would have gone into entertainment as an actress. But I'm glad for the journey that I'm glad for the road that I'm traveling.
Mm. So I want to ask a separate question, but we're going to get back to the whole incident with your incident with police. Going to diving into who you are, Can you tell us a little insight of your early childhood? You know, what that was like, your ideas, your role models, different things of that nature.
Oh, my early childhood was I didn't really, I was always a little bit of a loner, and I was one of those people who was teased a whole lot. So I didn't fit in very well at all in terms of my childhood, my school days, but I was very, very close to my mother, loved my family like anything. My mother and my father, they were both a big part of my life. And I loved them, but I think one of the things that happened because I just, I hated school, and I was one of those who was, I guess, bullied. Although I could fight, but still, if you don't fit in with the in crowd, and then people are, constantly making fun of you, it is just so unpleasant. But I think I think as a result of that, it made me comfortable as an adult with being able to make decisions that are not relying on popularity or what people or people's popular opinions on about me. So I think that sort of gave me the ability to I don't look for going against the grain. I'm not one of these kind of people that, oh, just because majority says this, I'm gonna do that way. I don't look for that. But I think that has sort of given me the courage to when the majority or when a large group is doing something I disagree with, or I should say, gave me the ability to be able to stand firm on my own opinion if I think something is right without being heavily swayed or dissuaded by the majority opinion or the group opinion if they think that it's not correct. Because I was just always comfortable with being like that anyway. That's how it was when I grew up. I wasn't popular, when I was a child. So I think in that way it sort of, helped to cultivate my personality a little bit as an adult.
Hmm. So now, talking about your the case or the incident that with the police. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we've said this. Your father, I believe, was a cop, right?
Yeah, he had been a police officer.
Well, and was he a police officer at the time of this incident that had happened, to you?
He wasn't a police officer, but my brother was. My father retired from the police force when I was 5 years old, and so he had long been retired because he had an injury. But one of the things that my father did was, and my father was not the kind of guy that would preach something to you, but I do recall him saying that first of all, he bragged about how he never had to use his gun. He said, I fired up in the air a couple of times, but I never had to use my gun on anybody. So he bragged about that. And he also said that a man running away from you is never a threat. So,
Correct.
Right. And unbeknownst to me, because that's my first introduction to police work, my father was also, he was a member of the, one of the like the Kingsmen, which was a Black police organization, but my father with saying those things to me and bragging to me about never having to use his gun was planting a seed in me in terms of that was going to carry me throughout my life when it came to the work I would begin to do in terms of community activism, because with every time I hear about a case with police brutality, it is my father's voice that I hear first. And I'm like, well, they violated that. They violated that. And so I thank him for that. But at the time when this incident happened, my brother was a sergeant in internal affairs in the next town over.
Ooh. So now that just raises another question. So with your brother actively serving, in law enforcement, did he find himself in a, rock in a hard spot in the sense of, here's my sister, but other men that are, in the same law enforcement as me, they violated my sister. Did he catch any flack for that? Did he try to make sure those officers was being held accountable for what they did, or what was the situation in that?
I will say this: my brother and my whole family. My brother was furious. He said, "Lisa, don't let them get away with it." In fact, they tried to contact him that day when it happened. And these were white officers who were as vicious as they possibly could be. One of their names was John Golden. I wish I could remember the other name, because I'd say them like without any problem. But one officer I remember, John Golden, and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna call your brother," and I'm looking at them like, "You're not very." I'm saying this to myself. You're not very bright, because if you get in touch with him, my brother's going to be furious. He is going to be furious, and he said, "Lisa, you fight this," and he helped me a lot. He really did, in terms of helping me to find an attorney. He also testified. My father was furious as well. So no, there was not that kind of thing, whereas because they were police officers, or that they could try to tell them something, they were not having it. And well, part of that, I'm their, family. And I don't say this boastfully, but I've always been kind of like a square person. So I didn't have a history of doing things that, and like I said, I don't even really like to use this analogy, because I feel that under colonialism we have gone through so much, and some of us make poor choices because of the situations that we're in. But I just didn't go down that route. So I was always kind of a square person. But no, they were furious. They were living. And my brother's attitude was I don't know if I can really curse, but his attitude was kick their ass. And he would even tell me things in terms of racism on the police force and everything. But my attitude has since deepened, and my understanding of things have deepened even beyond that. So I would have to say that I believe in Black community control of the police. And we see a situation right now where even we will see that Black officers are doing things and acting in ways that they should not be acting. So I just have to say that. But just in terms of telling the truth, my brother, he was furious. There was no thing as, "Oh, let's try to make this right because I'm a police and they are a police officer." No, it was nothing like that.
Every time you say something, which is good, it's refreshing, and it pops, another question pops up in my head that I just want to ask. And and I don't want to generalize and say all Black people, but for those that know, for those have a level of understanding of systemic racism in this country, we know about police brutality and how that works. And, especially it gives white people to really go hard on us, because now they're protected. You just said, lately, even Black officers. So my question is, why has it, because I've seen it a lot, I'm not going to lie, why has this been like this surge lately of Black officers victimizing, abusing people of their community? Or was this always like this, but now since we're in the era of cameras, it's seen as more? What is your take on that?
I can't really speak to whether it has always been like that, but I will say this much. I have seen, and this is kind of breaks my heart, I have seen a progression of Black people and professionals and all of that stuff who get into these systems, and the only operating system they're operating from is the one of the colonizer. And I'm going to talk a lot about systems, because we have to understand things systemically. We have to think like that, because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves just becoming neo-colonizers. In other words, white oppression and blackface, because that's the operating system that we operate from. And unfortunately, too many of us operate from those systems. And that's one of the reasons why I started out with saying we need the Black liberation struggle. The Black liberation struggle has been our only deliverance. It may have taken on different iterations. You may have had Martin Luther King talking one thing. You may have had Brother Malcolm talking something. You had Fannie Lou Hamer. You had Ida B. Wells. So you may have had these people. I'm not saying they were necessarily at odds with each other. So it may have taken on various manifestations. But if people were about trying to liberate our people and trying to bring our people through this vicious system and trying to change that system, I would say that they were a part of the Black liberation struggle, and even during those times, some of us made honest errors, and that's what history is for, so that we can learn and go forward. But if we are operating from the system of the colonizer, and let me be clear about something. If you make a choice to not be a part of the Black liberation struggle and connected to that, then you are making the choice, whether consciously or not, to allow the colonizer to define how you see the world and to operate from that perspective. And we know that this system of colonialism is a system that was built on genocide, enslavement, and part of the way that it did that was to lobotomize our culture from us, to lobotomize our history, to disconnect us from Africa, and then to have us repeating the refrains and the stereotypes that they assign to us to justify their brutality. It has us repeating that in our own minds, whether it's through the social media, whether it's through various media, sometimes through the music. And we have to understand that sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's not so overt. But when we see the lens different, when we see things differently, when we have a strong sense of who we are in our history and an understanding of these systems and how they were put in place to get the result that they are doing, where we have a system whereas although there's a lot of issues going on now and white people in terms of their class and their social struggle is slipping from what it used to be, we still have that system no matter what, where Black people are, the system wants us to be a permanent underclass. We have the worst of every statistic that there is. No matter what you're talking about, you're going to find that Black people have the worst of every statistic. And we have to understand that it was systemically set up like that. And the way that we're going to get out of this is to challenge these systems, to break the shackles in our minds from these systems, and to go that way. And by doing that, I'm telling you, it's so freeing and liberating.
That was a lot there, and I appreciate you for explaining that in detail. But go ahead, add some more.
Let me share one example of what I'm talking about with. There have been so many people that I have worked with on my journey, and being involved in the community, and you just never know where the lessons will come from. But one organization that I work with a lot is the Creative Spirits of the state of New Jersey. In fact, one of the first organizations that I worked with, and I was interested in theater and all of this kind of stuff. And the person, Shahada Sharif, who was the founder of Creative Spirit, she was going to meet people where they were. So, I was this young girl, and so I wanted acting, and she was going to help that. And we would do a lot of community theater and everything. And it was just a great place to really express myself and everything. But as I got older, she began to say, Lisa, why did you teach acting? Where were these young kids with creative spirits? And I remember saying to myself, I don't want to do that because I don't want to work with young kids at that time. And I wasn't that much older than them then. And the kids she wanted to work with, she didn't believe in turning anyone away. In fact, she wanted the kids who were considered troubled. She wanted all of them. It didn't matter whether they were considered, quote unquote, the good kids or the ones who were troubled or whatever, or I should say on a troubled path, not that they themselves were inherently troubled, but just, on a different path. So she just talked me into working with these young kids who were probably gangs, we had not heard a lot about gangs at that time in terms of the Northeast. And so a lot of these young kids were probably like the precursors to the gang activity, or maybe they seemed like they were that they were just ideal to be recruited into that kind of an environment. And so and they were challenging. Oh my gosh, they were challenging. I remember I didn't even want to continue with the workshops I was doing, but I said, I can't walk away from this because they're going to think that they won. And I remember that one class, it was getting, I'll say, a little bit out of hand. On the one hand, I mean, this young kid, he's cursing me out, and I'm standing up to him, but he was not. He was sitting down cursing me out. So his body language was showing that he was not really trying to challenge me physically or anything, but he's calling me all these names and everything, and I'm standing over him. I happen to be tall, so I'm using my height. And he's about 16 at the time, and I was maybe in my early 30s, and he is cursing me out. But I learned from the director of the program, because I saw that, I mean, she knew how to handle these youth, and she was not afraid of them at all. And she did not allow them to intimidate her. And yet she still had such love and compassion for them. So even when she had to step to them, she would always do it with love and compassion. So she might say, look, you better, I'll get you, whatever, but I know you're better than that. So she would always show them love and compassion first. And then when she would do that, then the discipline could come and they would hear it from her. So I just began to just mimic what she was doing, not because I believed it, but I was mimicking it. So I remember at one point, this young kid said to me, I referred to him as my brother, and he goes, you ain't my sister. I said, I don't care what you see me as, you're still my brother. And he was talking about how he could sell all these drugs and do all of this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I'm not impressed with that thug life. You don't impress me with that. I think you're better than that. So I kept saying that to him, although I'm not saying that I even believed it. So long story short, when we had the class the next week, the next workshop, he didn't say it with his words, but with his attitude. He was far more humble. And what touched me was when he found out that I had arrived into the building, he walked out of the class to come up to me, but his attitude was far more conciliatory. And that to me was like, interesting. And we were working on a Kwanzaa program for the VA hospital. And to these young kids, those veterans were really old people at that time. And I remembered I had pulled some of them out of the program. I said, you know what? Because they were just not ready for the discipline that it took to do a kind of performance. I said, okay, you're not going to be in the show. I'm like, but we don't want to be in the show. But when they came that day, the one who was acting so belligerent to me, he walked up to me and he said, Miss Lisa, what can I do? So I really learned something from that. And the way that I was able to apply it to my life since then is there have been a couple of times when I've been walking down the street and sometimes you are confronted with something you can't walk away from, you can't walk around. And one time this young kid, and he was, I don't know what was going on. He was outside this building screaming and everything and yelling at somebody. And I'm inside the building and I don't have no way to get out but to come through that front door. And so I just used some of the lessons that I'd learned from working with creative spirits. And I remember when I talked to this young man, I didn't see him as a monster. If I saw him as a monster, then there would be no way out. I'd be like, oh, this monster's out there. He's wild. He's crazy. Oh my gosh. And, but I didn't see him as that. And I remembered, I said, I'm just going to try some of the things that I had learned before. So I just began just talking, very calmly to this young man. And I said to him, I'm like, come on, young brother, what's wrong? Come on. You don't want to do it like that. And I just I was being sincere, but I remembered that I deliberately spoke in a softer voice to him. And I used words like, come on, young man, come on, young brother. I said, I don't know who got you so upset, but not this way. And to my surprise, he responded. I was shocked because he was yelling and screaming. And then he ends up sitting down on the curb. And I was glad he got like that before the police came, because I'm like, if the police come, they see him acting the other way, it's gonna be far worse. And so, and he's sitting down on the curb. I said, I don't know why you were so upset, but you don't want it. Don't let the police see you like this. And he's just sitting on the curb, and then the police come and they're like, did you see anything? I said, all I see is that he's sitting down here calm right now. That's what I see. And then a couple of days later, I'm walking down the street and somebody says hello to me, and it's that young man. So that's just one example of what I'm talking about. You have to change your lens in terms of how you see our community.
Thanks for the story. Thank you for that, adding context and everything to that. So as someone who, I'm talking about you, and I was an activist. How long have you been an activist in your community?
I'm not going to acknowledge much longer than 20 years. You can ask me 20 years from now. Oh, about 20 years. 20-something years, 25 years. It's not too much. That's
Okay, cool. 20 years. Let's say 19.
Like let's say
19.
Yeah, 20 years from now, it's still going to be like, oh, for about 20 years. That's my cutoff.
Okay, cool. Fair enough. So has there ever been a time that, and I know you know the history of whenever, Black people, we stand up for our community, we hold the powers that be accountable for the way how they treat Black people. Has there ever been a time that you've been afraid that, listen, by doing this, there's a very good chance I may be hurt or possibly even killed?
No, I feel that this is the best way that we as Black people have to ensure that it won't happen, because they have killed far more people who are walking down the street and minding their business. I know of two people that I grew up with, two different states, blown away. Police put a gun to their head and blew their brains out. One was Derek Humphrey, 1975, July 15th, in fact, in East Orange, New Jersey. He was a swimmer and an Olympic hopeful. He had graduated with honors. He was going to be going to college, worked as a lifeguard, and he gets into some kind of traffic tip or whatever with somebody's father, whose son happened to be a police officer. So, Derek Humphrey is driving down the street. The father's coming out of the driveway, and they almost get into an accident. And so I guess, an argument ensued. The father of the beast, I think the father is a beast too, because he did what his son did what his father had trained him to do. But anyway, he motions to his son. His son comes out of the house, plain clothes, puts the gun up to Derek Humphrey's head and blows his brains out. He was only 18 years old. Then Massachusetts, about 10 years later, this young, kid, he was in his 20s at the time, and but he lived on the street that my aunt lived on, that my cousins lived on, and when I would go to my aunt's house in Cape Cod, I would play with this young boy at the time, but his name, David Hendricks. And they claim he was drinking and driving. I don't know, but drinking and driving is certainly no reason to blow somebody's brains out. And I'm like, if they're drinking and driving, why do you shoot the driver? You should shoot the car to try to disable the car, because if a person is drinking and driving, shooting the driver is not going to stop the car. But they shot him a couple of times in the chest, and then the beast officer went to the driver's side of the car. After they shot him in the chest, as if he's shot in the chest, he's, I'm sure he cannot move. He's immobile. They prevented him from being able to move. And then he puts the gun to his head and shoots him about 5 more times in the head. And none of these people were doing anything that was causing violence to people. They were in situations that were non-threatening. None of them were doing anything like that. And not to mention that so many times I would hear, as we've often heard, somebody's walking down the street or just doing nothing. Like Amadou Diallo was just going into his apartment Amadou Diallo was the African immigrant. They shot him, I think, 52 times or something like that. He was going into his apartment in New York City in the late 1990s or early 2000s. So, and I learned from that situation that happened to myself because I was just getting off from work. That's all I was doing, getting off from work. And I was doing temp work, and I unexpectedly had to go to my temp agency, which was in Milburn, New Jersey at the time. And that's what I was doing. And to encounter and to run into what I ran into, no. So I felt more protected, being connected to a group of people that I knew that I could call if I needed to. And I always wanted to be able to say, I said, if I'm in this situation again, I'm going to at least have it. So I'm going to be able to say some names. I'm going to be able to say the names of some organizations. I'm going to find a way to work it in there. Or that if what goodness forbid, something happens, we don't know what's going to happen for us tomorrow, whatever, but I can at least feel more comfortable knowing that there's going to be a group of people, there's going to be organizations that are going to be like, what the hell happened here? So that became that's the only thing that made me feel protected. And again, there's also something about when you're with a group of people, when you're in those crowds, like I've heard people say, oh, they're tired of protesting. I will never be tired of protesting. I will never be tired of presenting the community out in those streets, because I can recall when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of people out there protesting, or if there was, I wasn't aware of it, but you weren't hearing things about it, you weren't seeing it. And at the time when that happened to me in New Jersey, there was not any organization that I knew of that I could think of off the top of my head that I could call, except for the one in New York with Al Sharpton, and they just weren't much help, or the NAACP, but there weren't really others that I could just automatically think of, and I wasn't seeing people protesting in the streets or anything. So that began to arise, and it began to become apparent that we had to be out on these streets doing things. Because with Amadou Diallo brought people out on the streets again, at least in this area in New Jersey. And I will never forget when we first began to get out on those streets and march. The first time I was participating in those kind of marches and everything, because I had not really done that before. And I will never forget seeing young kids in the community, the way they responded. One time, this young kid just started to do flips. He was so glad to see that. And then we would have people coming up to us in the community and saying, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you're here to see this, because a police officer slapped me in the face. This is what I remember one young woman was saying. So that call to the community is so important. It is so strong. We have to do more than just march, more than just protest. But I would never not want to see that, because I remember when we were not really doing that. And that is still a very strong call to the community, such that when things do go wrong, even if people are not involved in the Black liberation struggle now, they at least will know, I'm going to call this organization, I'm going to call that one.
You said NAACP, and you brought up another known, I guess, community leader, activist. You said they were no help at all.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, at that time, this was in the 90s. And I remember one when I called, and this happened to be the National Action Network, and the person who answered the phone said, well, that's New Jersey. We're not involved with that. And I was like, okay. And then I remembered that I had reached out to the NAACP, because I was under the impression that, civil rights attorneys are going to be easy to find, because of course there are people, fighting in the civil rights movement, quote unquote, and they're going to be out in abundance. And I found that that just was not true. And although the person I reached out to with the NAACP, she was trying to be helpful, but I remembered when I asked about an attorney, a civil rights attorney, because I'm just assuming that they were in abundance. All these people were still fighting for civil rights, all these attorneys. And she had to think, and she's like, oh, let me get back to you. And I remember saying, don't you just have them readily available? And she did come get back to me a couple of days later. And I was living in North Jersey at the time, and she found me somebody in South Jersey, and I wanted somebody whose office I could get to right away. I don't want to have to be driving an hour, 2 hours away to get to an attorney. I wanted somebody, boom, right there in the community that I could get to. But I could not at that time I looked at myself. I really looked at myself at that time. I didn't really like point the finger at them, because prior to that happening, I wasn't thinking about getting involved with the struggle. I wasn't thinking about getting involved with these organizations that were committed to social justice. I had graduated college a couple of years earlier, and while I was in college, I was involved with the Black Students Alliance and certain social issues that were going on then. But when I got out of college, I was like, well, I did my part, and I wasn't even thinking about these civil rights organizations. So I had to look at myself. I was not going to lambast them, because if I'm not thinking about being a part of the solution, then I can't. I can't just criticize them. And that's how I looked at it. So I said, I have to learn this lesson hard. I have to make sure that I am never disconnected again from the community and from these organizations, never. And I remember when that did happen to me in New Jersey, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from that. So that was serious with what happened. And I remembered that I was really upset with myself, that I was shocked by what happened, when everything about living in this country should have told me that I should have been prepared for that it could have happened. I was completely shocked. These white officers showed up on the scene. It was 4 white officers. It was white conductors on the train, although there was one Black conductor who ended up being a sellout and who did nothing. His name was Edward Norris, and the name of the white conductor was Thomas Stanton at the time, or is Thomas Stanton. I don't know if they're still around or not, but he went off on me and berated me. But there was about 4 or 5 other conductors. They did nothing. They did nothing to stop it. They did nothing to diffuse it. And he's berating me and accusing me of stealing the fare, which I did not steal. And I'm demanding that he stop talking to me like this. And he's like, hold the train. The train's not going to go anywhere. And then I'm in this all-white community, and I see these 4 white officers show up, and I get off the train to tell my side of what happened. And by that time, I could feel, and I was embarrassed because I could feel my voice start to choke, because it was just a natural reaction for tears to start coming from my eyes. I wasn't proud of that, but that was just a reaction. So I couldn't even yell had I wanted to. And they were just brutal with me immediately. They took one look at me. They said, you're a liar. Anything you want to know anything about this conductor's name, get it from the police report. And their first question to me is, what I want to know is, what are you doing in Millburn, this all-white neighborhood? And so I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember saying to myself at that time, now I know the look that our people saw before they were hung from a tree. That's exactly what I was thinking. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so, that encounter lasted for about an hour or so, in which these white men were just being abusive and, berating me and everything, although they did not physically hit me. So, that's, how that went. So I've always said I'm going to make sure that I'm never going to be disconnected again. Never.
So, you talk a lot about the Black, or you use the word Black liberation struggle a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that voting, let me rephrase that. Okay. You use the word Black liberation struggle a lot. So do you think that voting can somewhat help to put a dent into the systemic racism and the oppression and the struggle of Black America?
not with the way we use it, not with the way that it has been sold to us. And again, that's heartbreaking to say, but it's just true. We have been conditioned to think that we have to vote for evil. Now, whether it is voting for the lesser evil, however you put it, it is still voting for evil. And we have, when I think about the way that our ancestors have fought so hard, and to see the way that the vote has been squandered, or our relationship to the vote. Now, there are those within the Black liberation struggle who will say that voting ain't gonna get us out of this for the most part. Voting is not, we need revolution. And I don't disagree with that. But to me, it's like I wasn't, my earliest memory of myself is this very shy, timid person. That's my first memory of myself from the time I was a little girl. So my very basic nature is a very, very shy person. But I've had to grow into certain things. And I had to practice. I had to do it step by step, inch by inch. I think revolution and Black liberation is like a muscle or an idea that has to be exercised within us. We're not just like, boom, at least I'm not that way. Some people may have been born, boom, like that. I wasn't. So we have to sometimes take steps. So voting could at least be a step. At least we could be like a step in a certain direction, but we have to vote with the liberation on our mind, not vote for capitulation. A couple of days ago, what's today's date? September 17th? Yeah. 2 days ago, September 15th, the 60th anniversary of when 4 young girls were blown up in a church. When I'd heard about that when I was younger, that used to always weigh in my heart. And it wasn't just so much that the young girl, that some vicious beast blew up a church with young girls and little children, but it was also that whole system. That beast who did that was probably applauded by the community. He came from a community in which it was all right to do that. So you had people in his community applauding him on, his friends, it was great if you were, that's the way white society was, and a lot of it still is, It might be on the precipice of a change or whatever, but still, that's where it comes from. That's what most of their society has been. That's just the truth. And so you have those in the society who basically, they might not plant the bomb, but they're going to buttress the environment that allows it to happen. And you had the police who are going to lie. You had those who suspected, those who probably knew, who just turned their backs to this. So they turned their backs to it. And yet, it's so painful for me to see the Black community today that's voting for pro-war candidates. The Democratic Party, they are as repulsive and as evil as the Republicans. There literally is no difference. There may have been a little bit of a difference before, but all that has continued to happen. All people do by voting for evil is just condoning evil, and it only gets worse. I have not seen things get better since I have been voting. Emmett Till, this community, our generation, was not able to bring justice to Emmett Till. The beast who caused him to be murdered, Carolyn Bryant. I usually use the C word, but I'm going to use the word beast. Because I'm going to call it exactly like it is. I'm not going to dress it up. I don't want I'm not going to use flowery words to describe such horrors in people. I don't want people to be like that. So I deliberately use these words, but also it's true. But she was allowed to die without fear of anybody investigating her. She was protected by the government. She was allowed to die. I don't think anybody served a second in prison for the murder of Emmett Till. And I remembered reading about how his mother, Mamie Till, had begged, I think Eisenhower was the president then, and she had begged him to please look into the case, please have the Department of Justice investigate. He goes, I'm not going to do it. Well, we got a black president, and we had with Trayvon Martin. And so, yeah, the Department of Justice supposedly did an investigation, and basically they cleared George Zimmerman and said they could find nothing wrong with what he did. And yet, Black people supported Barack Obama. It was an emotional poll, but Black people have been supporting the Democratic Party for the longest time. And I used to do that myself. And I remembered, I don't remember if I voted for Clinton his second term, although I did vote for him the first term. When he played that saxophone on Arsenio Hall and put it in black glasses, that was all I needed. All I needed to see, and I voted for him. And but I don't remember who I voted for his second term. But I do know this much. By the year 2000, I was done. I said, I'm never going to just vote for the Democrat again unless they presented somebody that was worth voting for, that had earned my vote. But I haven't had to worry about that because it has not been a Democrat, at least not on the national stage, or really any Democrat that I can vote for, that earned my vote, that made me want to go out and vote for them. There hasn't been one. And so now we look at, now the sheets are pulled off them even more. It was just such a low when the Black community supported Joe Biden. Jim Crow Joe Biden, who had sided with segregationists who were against busing. And back in those days, when you were against busing, like in the 70s, and you were siding with those who were against busing, you were siding with people who were attacking Black children who were being forced to go to their school systems. And so I remembered seeing, although I was watching it on the news, and at one point I was going to school in Massachusetts, but not in Boston, but I'll never forget seeing and watching on the news how adults, white women mainly, were trying to turn the bus over with Black children, and were trying to attack them and fighting them. Adults attacking Black children for going to school. That's who Joe Biden sided with them. Joe Biden sided with the communities that were doing that. And then he wrote the crime bill, proudly was one of the authors of the crime bill that caused that helped the prison population to skyrocket and built up the prison industrial complex off the blood and tears of Black people. We were getting all these unfair sentences. It was like if you did cocaine, people who did crack cocaine got like sentencing that was like twice or three times as long as somebody would get for just cocaine. And I think the discrepancies was even much greater than that. And it was horrible. And so many people were put in prison for a nonviolent crime. But Joe Biden boasted about that. Joe Biden bragged about it. And yet things have capitulated so far. Things are where the sunken place has gotten even deeper, that we're now going to think that that was a choice. I'm like, no. And yet, many people in the Black community or Black Democrats voted for Joe Biden. That was just a low that is nothing to be proud of. And then we see that, speaking of Carolyn Bryant, the one who murdered Emmett Till, under Trump, and I've never voted Republican in my life, and I never liked Trump. I didn't like his shows. I never went to his casinos. I never watched The Apprentice. And also Trump had called for the Central Park, those young men were referred to as the Central Park Five when they were in their teenage years. He had called for them to be executed. Mm-hmm. And he still never, even to this day, even though all the evidence has come out, even though it has been demonstrated, proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they never did it, and they never had any evidence that they did it anyway. They never had that. But even with all of that, he still said, well, they were doing something, so that's how repulsive he is. But even with that, Joe Biden is not better. And when Trump was president, the Department of Justice opened the case into Carolyn Bryant, and they were supposedly investigating her to see her role in the murder of Emmett Till, to see what her role was, or to investigate it or whatever. But when Joe Biden got in office in 2021, the Department of Justice closed the case on Carolyn Bryant, saying that they could find nothing wrong with what she did. And Joe Biden support. This is the man that Black people are supporting. The more we lower our standards, if the only way we can feel like we are winning something is to lower our standards, and we shouldn't even be in the game, I'd rather see people just not vote at all. I'd rather Black people say we ain't gonna vote at all than to see us continue to do this, because we give a horrible message. And the more we lower our standards, the weaker the Black liberation struggle becomes, or I should say, the smaller it becomes. The more that we the more that we turn away from that, and then we just go to the Democratic Party, and then we capitulate and collapse all of our standards, the more vicious those who seek to come at us, the more it's just going to give them the belief that they could come at us even harder, which is what we are seeing happening. You don't sit here and fight against oppression by weakening yourself, by weakening your stances. It doesn't work like that. So the weaker our stances becomes, the more emboldened those who want to openly practice are going to do it. And you're going to see even more and more so-called Democrats who are going to be like, the seats are going to be off. We're just going to be even more in your face with it. And that's the only message that you give, that the Black community gives, by embracing a strategy that is a horrible strategy, that we have 60 years behind us to show that it doesn't work, and that we cannot continue to do that. And by the way, I'm with the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. We're having our march on the White House, the Black People's March on the White House, November 4th. I had to get that in.
Get it in. Listen, I appreciate you, and make sure you say it a few more times as this go on. I just want to point out things sarcastically, some things not sarcastically, but you shook up the core with that, and you did the number one cardinal rule, which is when it comes with Black people, don't talk about the Bible. They don't want it, and you didn't do that, but. Mm-hmm. Don't put the Democrats on blast, and you definitely did that. And President Biden said, "You ain't Black." Remember that, you ain't Black if you don't vote for him. Remember, Black people still voted for him.
I want to get that message.
Miss Lisa, you ain't Black.
That shade of Black. Black comes in various shades. I ain't that shade of Black, but I'm getting. You see this Black on me? I'm getting blacker by the moment. I'm getting blacker every day. And also the Democratic Party is coming after. I am a member of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations, a part of the Uhuru movement. I do not separate my activism from my everyday life. And the Democratic Party under the Biden administration is coming after Omali Yeshitela and other people within the Uhuru movement, and they're facing 10 to 15 years in prison for standing up and speaking out against the United States government, and for organizing, Black people, for organizing this community in terms of voting for reparations and putting Black revolution on the ballot. So, and I can even show you, in fact, I'm going to make sure that I show you the 15-point program that the Black is Back Coalition says, if they don't adopt this program, don't vote for them. It's really that simple. Just don't vote for them. I don't care who gets in. If it came down to my vote, people are like, oh my gosh, we're going to have Trump. If you don't do this, we're going to have Trump. But in the meantime, we've had overt war. Mm-hmm. not ending over war, and no demands by the masses of the people to end it. It's one thing if you had the masses of the people demanding that these wars end and not voting for pro-war candidates, but we don't have that. We have the masses of the people, at least to vote, capitulating and voting for pro-war candidates. And if you vote for pro-war candidates, you're voting for pro-war. You just can't keep deluding yourself and overtly. And the numbers, I was reading something in the Black Agenda report. I want to say they put the numbers at about 30 million people. That sounds so staggering. You know what, maybe, could I take a moment to at least verify that?
Go ahead. Take your time. Go ahead.
And I want to say they're talking about since the 2000s, because the United States, its whole trajectory has been war. Out of its official forming, like I think in 1776 or whatever, was so-called the birth of the United States, whatever. But out of its existence, there's only maybe been about 20 years where the United States was not at war internationally. They've always been at war with the Black community. They've always been at war with indigenous people, and they've always been at economic warfare with like the countries that they call Latin America. And I hate using the term America or Latin America because they had an identity before Europeans showed up on these lands and infested the place with colonialism. But Margaret Kimberly of the Black Agenda Report, she wrote an article, and I mean, the numbers are staggering in terms of the amount of death that the United States bloodletting war machine has caused. And I'm talking about the numbers of death, I want to say since 2000. We're not going to even do the 1900s. We're not going to do them. We're not going to go back to the 20th century. We just going to stick with this century.
Start 2000.
Yes. Let me just see something a moment. Okay. So, the September 11th legacy of forever wars and the Patriot Act and loss of legal rights. But it seems like she talks about, I mean, when I saw that number, I couldn't even finish reading it because it's so staggering. I can't even imagine that the numbers are that high. I'm sure it's over 1 million people, I'm sure. I hear with Iraq, 500,000 to 1 million people in Iraq alone. Okay, she says, the way that she says in the so-called war on terror, which was in fact a war of terror, began in full force after September 11th. In the intervening years, more than 4.5 million people have died as a result of U.S. post-9/11 wars. That's still a staggering, unbelievable amount. And 38 million more have been displaced as refugees in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and the Philippines, and more. You know, you got people, those are probably the overt wars of bombing people, but then you also have the economic wars and colonialism and capitalism, and the United States just treating countries within the surrounding areas and, non-white countries that are on this continent just as if they're their toilet. The United States treats them as their toilet. They can just get what they want from them. And, they have all of these horrible economic wars. And then there are people in Haiti, there's wars, there's proxy wars, there's covert wars, there's shadow wars, just war upon war upon war.
Thank you for those statistics or those stats. Wow, I had no clue it was that many people at the hands of the United Snakes of America. But go ahead.
Not to mention the devastation in terms of birth defects. I've seen pictures, and I believe that all life is equal in value. I don't like to look at one person's life as less than or anything like that. I don't like to do that. Don't like to think like that at all. But I've seen pictures of babies that you wouldn't even recognize as being human. Those kind of birth defects. And the United States' attitude is, you can't prove that our bombs did that. And the people's attitude in the United States is that they just don't get it. It's like, so what? That's the attitude of the majority of the people in the United States.
You're correct. So, as far as because I had this conversation with a few of my friends, and I'm like, United States are the best at deflection, at media persuasion, propaganda. They are the best at that. And I say that to say with other countries that they are having issues with, they always going to have issues with. Do you think there's going to come a time where America, maybe in our lifetime, I don't, possibly, whether you're talking about China, Russia, whatever, where these countries are going to rise up and say, basically you reap what you sow and attack America, and America is going to lose its, military power, its economic power, or things of that nature?
Well, I remember August Wilson one time said something to the effect that, not August Wilson, Amos Wilson, said something to the effect that we should never think that something could not happen. The United States is the biggest instigator of things in the world right now. And this is not to say that the other countries are perfect or anything, or the other quote unquote superpowers, but the United States is the one that has been instigating everything. They just have been. They love war. And I think the Democrats love war even more than the Republicans. I've heard Republicans say, look, we got to at least stop some of these wars, but the Democrats are no, they're hell bent on war, even the so-called squad. If you are on that kind of a footing and you continue to think that you own the world, as they do, they've just been invading all these other countries, and people today want to talk about Russia. I'm like, I can't see what Putin has done. I really can't, or what Russia has done. I really can't see this so much. The situation with Ukraine is a proxy war, and the United States has been instigating everything. They want Ukraine to join NATO, and there's other kind of conflicts that have been going on in Ukraine with the what had been happening, like I think since 2014 or something like that, and the conflict that had been going on where the people in Ukraine now who are in power were attacking and going to war civilly with other people in the Ukraine who identified more with Russia. I believe that is probably not the best explanation of what's happened. So please look further than what I just said. You can go to the Black Alliance for Peace or the Black Agenda Report or the burningspear.com to get far more in-depth information about what I just said. But no matter what, the United States has been instigating that as well. And they have been trying to get Ukraine to join NATO, and that's right at Russia's border. And I learned this, that when Germany went into Russia, they did it through the Ukrainian border. So that's very serious to Russia. But the United States has been instigating all of this kind of stuff. And if we do not get on a different footing, if the people in this country do not wake the F up and demand that this be stopped and stop being so drunk with American exceptionalism, we will be at that place, because you cannot have a country continuing to disrespect the world and think that the world is going to take it. I knew it was just going to be a matter of time. I didn't know how or the when, but before that bear was going to raise its head. And of course, that bear is Russia. And Russia does have the capability to fight to engage in nuclear war with the United States, although, you know, humanity wouldn't win, but we should never think that it could not happen. And we have to raise our voice. We have to demand, because the people in the United States have been complicit with that. That's what voting is going to show. That's what history is going to show. I'll never forget when September 11th first happened, and when people were so uncertain. I mean, people in the United States knew there was going to be war, but people were so uncertain if people were going to be drafted and all of that kind of stuff. And I will never forget that in New York City, it was the largest demonstration of any kind that I had ever been to in my life, where you had to have about 1 million people converging in Midtown New York. You could not see from one block to the other. And I've been in all kinds of crowds. This crowd for me was even a bit frightening. I literally had to hold the hands of people that I came with. And I knew my way around New York very well, but we would have been disconnected from each other. And I've never, ever seen that many people. Could have been even more than 1 million. And that was before the United States went into Iraq. The United States immediately went into Afghanistan, but it was before they went into Iraq. And as soon as it became apparent that there was not going to be a draft, all of that stopped. So it wasn't an anti-war demonstration that most people were participating in. It was an anti-draft. And basically the people of the United States said, you don't implement a draft, we don't care what you do outside of our borders. And that's really a hard truth. And I didn't think it was going to stay like that. I thought, because this was like 2002 or something, and I didn't realize it was going to remain that way. I really didn't. I had more faith in people in this country, but that has been somewhat shattered. Yeah, really disappointing to say that.
So I'm going to ask you, can you name the most important or the biggest issues, we talked about this before, within the Black community? When I mean issues, the most important things, systemic racism issues that is affecting Black people in the community the most?
Colonialism. And colonialism is the system that we live in, the system of oppression, which involves racism, capitalism, and all these other ugly isms that we live in. But colonialism, in which our way of existence, African people, we came here as no, we didn't come here. We were kidnapped and brought here, and in which our way of existence, our way of looking at the world has been completely lobotomized from who we are to a large extent, and where we have this other system forced upon us in which we have no control over anything. We really don't. We didn't set up the system of policing. We didn't set up the medical system. We didn't set up the school system. We don't have any kind of control. Control only exists within what the colonizers, within what this brutal system says that we can do. That is not control. That is not self-determination. And it permeates every aspect of our existence, such that we define what they call medicine or what they call health according to what they call it, not according to our African cultures, not according to anything that we set up. The system of the financial system, it's defined according to what they say. They set the rules up. They do. And whenever they want to change it, they do. At one time, if you wanted to be, in one time, in order to be able to get a job, in order to be hired, you had to show some kind of mental acumen. If you were showing signs of dementia or signs of not being able to think straight, There's no way you would get the job, especially if you were Black. But we just saw them put somebody as president. 80 years old, or he's 80 years old now. At one time, you had to retire at 65. But until they decide to change the rules, this ain't Black people setting up these rules. It's not the Black community. It's them doing it. We don't have control over our lives. It just took me within the last couple of years to realize that what happened after the Civil War and when Black people rose up, physical chattel slavery ended because we rose up and kicked ass and we ended it. Literally, that's not even hyperbole. That's what happened. Of course, that history has been hijacked from us and it's always told in the way to make us so weak, but that is what happened. But after that, it was just like this system said, okay, you're U.S. citizens. And there was really no discussion about, do we want to be citizens of the United States? I regret that happened like that. The choice could have been, we want our own systems and maybe to go back to the continent or whatever, but that did not happen for us. We were just placed in this system as citizens here to be a part of this country, although we came here more really as prisoners of war. There was no real discussion that I'm aware of. There might be other people far more knowledgeable about this. And please, anyone, if I say anything that is incorrect or that needs to be challenged, I want people to please feel free to say, oh, no, that's not correct or whatever, please, because I'm learning this as well. And I do believe in engaging in healthy and critical discussions. So I'm always open to, if I say anything that somebody does not accept, or if they have more to add to it, please feel free. And certainly this is one area of discussion that I would welcome other people's opinions about this as well. But that is not what happened. So we were just called, okay, we're going to make you a citizen of the United States. We're going to take your agency from you, and we're going to set you up under this system. Now, if you look at the indigenous people, although they are not respected at all, there's no respect for them. Their cultures are not respected, but they supposedly have quote unquote sovereignty. You have some tribal nations and everything. But again, I'm not even using that as a model because the United States is treacherous. It's their land. Their land does not belong to the colonizers. They stole this land, they took it, and then they're going to talk about giving allotting a little bit of land, which is probably not even the most, the healthiest, land, probably the land that you can do the least with. Because every time when they find that they've got some kind of minerals or something on their land, they go and take it. That's what the United States does. But theoretically, they're supposed to be independent, sovereign people, theoretically, wink, wink.
Well, at least I don't know if I agree. This sarcastically. I'm being sarcastic here. I don't know if I agree because Governor Ron DeSantis said you say African people came here as prisoners of war, but I don't disagree with that. We were kidnapped. I don't disagree with that. But Governor Ron DeSantis says that, Black people benefited from slavery. We've got so many skills and different things like that.
Of course, he's a colonizer. He's invested in this. He's invested in things going backwards. He's invested in that. That's how he gets to feel so great about himself, because he can say there's these other group of people and we're better than they are, because, a lot of them are invested in that. And it's really a shame. It really says a lot about the nature of people who believe like that the only way you can look at yourself and feel good about yourself is that you got to be exploiting and lying about and killing other people. And I know, it's hard for them to look at themselves and tell them we love ourselves and then to be truthful about their history. I wouldn't want their history either, but it's the truth. I wouldn't want to tell it either if I had that history. Literally, I've always been very, very proud. I've always felt very fortunate to be Black because I didn't have that history. I never wanted that history. I don't want that history for anything on earth. But the reality is the way that it should be, but I can't tell anybody who's white how they should be. But I can say that I do know of organizations like the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Under the Uhuru movement, you're going to hear me reference them a lot, but I just have to say they are doing dynamic work. They say that they work under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is the co-founder, leader of the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party. But in terms of the analysis, in terms of the critical study that is done, and that white people also have to do who want to change this paradigm, they go deep and they pull no punches. It is a ruthless system. A ruthless system built on the blood and destruction of African people and indigenous cultures that were not white, and most of the white community brought into that. And whether they want to change it or not, I can't make them want to change it, but you do have more now that are doing the work and who are saying, we don't want this to be our legacy any longer. And I've even heard other white people who are not a part of the Uhuru movement, not a lot, I'm going to be honest, not a lot, but they have said, I don't want this to be my legacy. This cannot be it. And they shouldn't want it to be their legacy. I know I wouldn't want it to be, but I can't speak for them about that. But you have other people who that's what their whole existence is wrapped up in. They cannot feel human. They cannot feel good about themselves unless they are trying to bring down other cultures. And the only way they can do that is with, the gun. And of course, by they're not trying to prevent people from learning the truth, from us learning the truth about who we are.
So, I love how you highlight your Africanness. You say that, you wear that proudly.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about this too. How can Black people, how can African people, I'm just gonna put it just to America now, those global, but I'm just, throughout the world, but I'm just specifically talking about America. How can African people of the diaspora can come together if we still are dealing with an identity crisis in the sense of you got African people in America that I'm not African, I'm a Moor, I'm an Aboriginal, I'm a Hebrew Israelite, and due to the Bible, you enslaved me, and African enslaved me, or I'm God body, I'm this, I'm that, so you got so many different identities where African people do not want to accept that they're African, their African roots. How do we deal with that to come together to try to seriously fight this system or this beast, as you would say?
Well, first of all, African people who say that, and I use the word Black and African interchangeably because we are all African people. They stole us. We were kidnapped, brought over here. And I remember one time, for a moment, it felt like I went back in time. I was trying to commune a little bit, trying to envision the first Africans in my family who were taken, and trying to just envision what they went through and trying to say, what would I tell them? Would I tell them that I'm gonna stay with them, or would I tell them I'm gonna identify with the colonizer? To hell with you! I'm walking away from who you are, and I'm identifying with the people who did this brutal, horrible thing to you. And I remember I said to myself, nah, I'm staying with them. I'm staying with my people. I ain't never going with the colonizers. So many of us just do not know the truth, because if we knew our true African history, we would want to identify. Africa is the richest continent on the face of the earth, with the richest history. The first life forms were found on the continent of Africa. The first life forms, the first humans. Africa has the longest uninterrupted lineage in terms of modern history, modern human history, and probably it dates back even further than that in terms of the first humans, the first, people who were on Earth. Africa has the most diversified DNA in the world. Africa has the most diversified DNA in the world. And so, and not to mention that it's also the richest continent on earth in terms of natural resources. Why would anyone want to disassociate themselves from that? And also doing so, it's not being strategically smart. We have to have a larger picture of this. We have to have a larger picture. The European in this country has always used issue of immigration to build their numbers. If you notice, when we think about immigrants, who do we think about? What's some of the first people that come to our mind? When we think about immigrants, we don't think about the northern border. Nobody calls Canadians immigrants.
That's right.
We don't think about Europe. We don't think about Germany. We don't think about Irish people. We don't think about people from England. We don't think about them as being immigrants, although there are a lot of them over here. We think about the Black and brown people. We think about the southern border. We think Haitians. We think Mexicans. We think people, we think Spanish-speaking oppressed people. The people in the United States have a history of using immigration to buttress their numbers. They're going to make sure that white people are going to be what they call the majority over in this country, no matter what. And they did use immigration to do that. And so we have to think differently. Why are we going to cut ourselves off? Why would we want to do that? That's just so illogical. It's nonsensical. And yes, I've heard things too that African people were here before Columbus and all of that. And that may well all be true, but it doesn't mean that we're not African, and it does not mean that what happened when what they call the transatlantic trade in human beings, that so many of us were brought over here, it doesn't mean that that did not happen, because that did. And why would you want to disassociate yourself from that? But of course, they do not really understand or know the history, because it's not just about what people of this skin color did. That's part of it. But it's not just about that. It's about how you perceive and interpret the world. The example that I can use, that I think one of the best examples, at least that I know, is when we look at what happened with COVID. And the United States had some of the worst numbers on the face of the earth. That's just true. They had more death than any other place. The United States did. And the Western world did not fare much better at all. And that has a lot to do with their systems and how they relate to the world and how they relate to medicine and all that, and what they even define as medicine. But guess what continent had the best stats of any place on earth? The continent of Africa. And I read some of the things they can't figure out why, and they want, oh my gosh, and it's probably because they don't know how to count and they don't know how to track things and all of that kind of stuff. But it's interesting though, when they were talking about AIDS or talking about Ebola and talking about African people, dying of Ebola, nobody questioned their ability to be able to count then. But even if you just look at, like for me, I knew that COVID was really serious because of what I could see going on my timeline, even before I was able to track these, because they had global trackers like worldometer.com and other places were globally tracking the numbers. I was going according to what they were saying. Mm-hmm. But even outside of that, I recognized that COVID was something was really going on because of what I saw on my timeline, because of what I heard the people around me. But yet on the continent of Africa, because other people have gotten into these numbers and like, oh well, they're not counting the numbers correctly, and people are like, but they're not hearing the reports either from people in the community about people, their neighbors dying and this one dying, because people know when people die, they know that you can't hide death when a lot of people are dying. But anyway, Africa still had some of the best stats. And even, numbers started to change somewhat when they began to force the vaccine on people. And they didn't want to take it. They did not want to take it. They believed in their own medicines. And yet, of course, if people understood, I know that I wasn't just looking at their stats, but I was also wanting to hear what they were saying about what they were using. And everything that they said that they used, for every herb that they used, or for everything that they did, like, for example, Artemisia, the United States government has scientific websites where people could go, like PubMed, that's one of them. And I would put in like Artemisia, and I would do research on these government sites, the United States scientific literature sites and all of that kind of stuff. And I would do searches in their sites to see what they were saying about Artemisia. And every single, Artemisia is just the most popular one that I remember, but there were so many others. Every herb that the African people in Africa were saying that they were using, I would go and look on the, look into to see what the scientific research was showing. And yes, on the sites that the United States government had, that I guess their science industry, whatever they call it, that they work with, they were basically attesting to the efficacy of these herbs. And then, like, Artemisia is the one that really sticks out because the president of Madagascar said he had come up with COVID organics, and that it was something that really worked. And when you looked at what was in COVID organics, one of the main herbs was Artemisia. And they laughed and there's no proof, there's no proof, there's no proof. But yet, if you look up, I think the University of Kentucky, and you look up some of the things that are going on, and they're like, oh, we see our research shows that in vitro studies show that Artemisia, yes, that we're working on, that we're cultivating, can stop COVID or can, do whatever. They would say these things. And every herb, every herb that I have ever seen that was referenced in terms of on the continent of Africa, that that the people were using, regardless of what they were using it for. You can do research in these other, like I said, these scientific databases, and you will find so much research basically verifying the strength of those herbs and verifying what the people on the continent were saying, and not just with herbs, but with other things that they use as well. So I'm like, if Black people really understood that, they would feel proud. If we knew the history of Bayer aspirin, when they created Bayer aspirin, that started the rise of the pharmaceutical industry. But Bayer, the formula for aspirin, was something that was that they got from the Egyptian papyrus, or the ancient writings of Egyptians and people from Samaria, ancient Africa. And in their writings, they were talking about the willow tree and how using the willow tree could stop with pain and all of that. And so these formulas, these writings got passed along, people just doing things, you hear about something working, the willow tree, you're going to use it for pain and all of that kind of stuff. And then at some point, when there was the discovery of like the Egyptian writings, and that when they were brought from, brought from Egypt to like Europe or something like that, then you notice, I think in the 1900s or maybe late 1800s, there, I forget I forget who the founders of Bayer are, but Bear Aspirin comes out with a way to mass produce and to manufacture the aspirin. Now, I'm not going to say they didn't add certain things to it. I'm not going to say that. But they got the idea, they got the formula, they got the inspiration, they got it from ancient Egypt and ancient Samaria. That's where they learned about this willow tree and the properties of the willow tree for pain. But did they give any credit to Egypt, to ancient writings, to traditional medicines? No, they did not. But they began to mass produce Bayer aspirin. And then from that, we see the rise of the pharmaceutical industry. And by the way, I found out that aspirin is a trade name, and I forget what it's short for, but that's kind of like a trade name. I'm like, oh, because we just think that it's called aspirin, but that was a trade name for whatever it was that they had come up. It's like some real long name, but yeah. But if we knew that, we would have a different feeling about Africa and our knowledge, because the Europe and colonialism, I mean, it's so deep and it happens on so many levels, but it is also about controlling the knowledge and being the ones who define what is true, and especially in terms of medicine and science, and what is not true. The episteme is what they refer to that as. Being able to define, to control who says what is true and what is not true. Who is the one to say that whether something is scientifically sound or not? And I have seen so many times they will just discredit people. Like one time there was, I was reading something about China and their medicines and their traditional Chinese medicine. And there was some herb or something that they had been using for like thousands of years. And then the United States comes along and talks about, we're now going to begin studies on that herb, and we're going to be going through our process of proving, of scientific proof, being able to prove this. And I remember reading that and was like, who the hell do you think you are? They got 3,000 years, and you're basically going to say that doesn't count unless you make it go through their crap, what they call truth, and they use that against people so many times. They'll be like, well, they didn't do any double-blind studies. I'm like, that means nothing about your double-blind studies, the standards that they set up to say whether something is true or not, whether it works or not. That's just them controlling things.
Right.
I want us to really understand that.
Now, you said something about Africa being the richest, right? You said Africa is the richest continent in the world. However, what we see is, famine. We see, the commercials of kids having 1,000 little bugs around them, biting at them or whatever, and their bodies look, starvation. You hear so much in the news of America coming to give aid, to at different African countries because we're so poor. There's no money, all these different things. And so I want to know what is, again, I'm asking an answer. I'm asking a question I pretty much already know the answer to, but I want you to explain it. Why does European countries are basically stealing, first showing an image, this false narrative image of Africa, but also at the same time, they are stealing the natural resources from Africa while also saying that they are the poorest continent in the world.
Africa is not poor. Africa is being looted, and because they have the control and they have the gun. And I remember when you and I were talking, anyone who has a gun to your head The person with the gun to your head is always going to be the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most brilliant person in the room. The one with the gun to your head. I can tell you, you are not going to ignore that person. And if you don't have what you need to get you out of that situation in terms of being able to match that kind of weaponry, you're going to be listening to the one with the gun to your. That's just how it goes. And so that's how they were able to do what they were able to do. And I'm really oversimplifying that. I truly am. And we also need to understand, too, that Africans, that we did fight back, that, we resisted in many, many ways. So I don't want to act like we did not. But we still, there was something obvious that happened. And we can see what this has grown to today. The United States, what gives the United States its power is its gun, its military, that it can go in there, bomb the hell out of others, invade them, and that's what makes people tend to listen to them. And then, of course, there's a psychological devastation that they implement once you have a gun to somebody's head, and you overpower them with that, and then you have to, in order to keep it up, you have to attack them psychologically. But it's the system. So many things systemically are done. And if your relationship to how you relate to this world is interrupted, you are going to also see the damage from that. We have some obvious examples of what I'm talking about. Like, I was shocked to recently learn that Smokey the Bear, did you ever hear about Smokey the Bear?
The cartoon cat? Yeah, Smokey the Bear.
I just remember hearing about something about Smokey the Bear, and I didn't realize that was built on racism. And because it sounded logical, don't stop forest fires. Smokey the Bear says, don't stop forest fires. Well, when I was growing up, I don't ever remember hearing about forest fires just burning and burning and burning the way they do now. Right. In fact, recently Canada had forest fires burning. I don't even know if they're still burning or not. California, now we hear about forest fires all the time burning in California. That used to never happen. When the 2000s came in, I remember hearing about Australia. They said Australia lost so much land. Australia was like in flames. Well, I remember when reading about when Australia was in flames, I remember people kept saying, well, what about the First Nations people? What about the African people in Australia who were there first before the Europeans? And so when I just started to do some research, I began to learn, and this was like mind blown, that the First Nations people, that the African people of Australia, what they refer to as Aborigines, that they had a system that they had worked with in terms of how they understood how to manage the land. They had been there at least for 30,000 years, maybe longer. But and the Europeans got there about 150 years ago or so. But they never had those fires like that. They never lost the land that they had lost until the Europeans got there. When the Europeans got there, they're going to make people change their ways because they have no respect for people and they have a completely different way of relating to the land. But the people in Australia, they understood how to manage that land, and they understood that they would have their community burns or their cultural burns where they understood how to navigate through how to handle the land, and they would have their burns in the same way indigenous people on Turtle Island, which, has been misnamed the United States of America, but indigenous people on this land as well, and in Canada, they understood how to manage the land, and they understood the importance of having their community burns or their cultural burns. And so they would be able to navigate through the land, how they related to it. And that way it would prevent all these humongous forest fires if you did not do that. And also when they would burn the land in the way that they would know how to do it, it would also help the forest to just grow back even more beautifully. So this is just one example of how when you have when your land is infested with colonialism and with people who have no respect for you, no respect for your way of life, and they have a certain way of relating to the earth, how it can be deadly, how it can put people at a disadvantage if this is their way, and that's one way that I can sort of explain what I'm talking about. So when that happens, when your systems are interrupted, and when you have colonizers who then implement a system at your expense, designed so you will be in the rut that you're in no matter what, then this is some of the things that we have to deal with. And colonialism is going on the continent of Africa, which is why I'm so glad to see so many African countries rising up, because we are fed up with it. And which is why, again, in the United States, November 4th, come to the march, the Black People's March on the White House. And yes, it is the Black People's March on the White House. And we very strategically named ourselves the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. And that coalition was named after the glorious history of the African liberation struggle in this country. We take away nothing from other communities at all either, who rose up and did great things. Like, we know there were indigenous people, there are Spanish-speaking oppressed people, because interestingly enough, I'm hearing more Spanish-speaking oppressed people saying, don't define me by what the colonizers called me. Don't call me Latin America, or, don't call me that. I'm not that. And, they get into more of who they culturally are. So that's why I use the word Spanish-speaking oppressed people the same way I speak English, but I'm not England. I'm not English. That's not what I am. I speak it, but that's not who I am. So, so I don't take away anything from their struggles, but the African liberation struggle is one of the most glorious struggles in this country. And to the extent that anybody has any rights that are not white people, and even I said earlier, or I told you that I'm not a feminist because I cannot get into I'm not going to erase or eradicate the role that white women played in terms of being side by side with their white male counterpart, in terms of perpetuating these systems of oppression. And for them, it was about who was going to be the one to control these systems. They wanted to have the same control as their white male counterpart, but they were not standing up as a group against what was going on. That's not how it happened. So I won't call myself a feminist for that reason. So I will just say that in terms of these systems were set up so that people who are not white would be at the bottom. And when you change a person's relationship to how they relate to this world, it can have devastating consequences for the community. I am starting to learn one of the things that we have to change our telling of this when we say that, well, Europeans came over to this country called, this country of Turtle Island, now misnamed the United States, and that they brought disease, they brought smallpox, and that it wiped out the indigenous people. And they call that the virgin soil theory. And that is really told in a way to disempower the indigenous people. Even if they did bring smallpox over here, to just make it look like that the indigenous people didn't know what the hell to do and that it just wiped them out is not fair. It disempowers them. It takes away from their knowledge. I'm sure they would have done what they've done before. And people figure it out. They use their resources, they use their understanding of things to figure it out. But one of the things that happened that the colonizers also brought with them is war and devastation and removing people from their land and interrupting their way of relating to their survival and to how to live. And when you do that, that's going to also cause a lot more death, and that's going to make disease more prevalent. Everywhere that the European went, every time they invaded somebody, plagues followed. But it was not just because these people did not have the intelligence to be able to navigate the way of the disease and to be able to develop their own medicines to take care of it, because they did find, in fact, that there were some indigenous herbs here that they found could beat smallpox. But when you bring war and you bring interruption and you bring disruption and you force people off of their lands and you maybe put them into lands that are not as easily to cultivate, you are going to wreak all kinds of havoc on them, and especially if they don't have the firepower to match them. The Europeans were very invested in firepower, very heavily invested in that, so that they could go throughout the world and steal all these resources that Europe didn't have. The history of Europe, the history of the world is not about people trying to be around Europeans and going to where they were, although you probably had explorers, but that's really not the history of the world. The history of the world, at least the modern, I should say modern times, is the European going into other countries and invading and infesting them and all of that kind of stuff with their warfare, and then putting up these artificial borders and telling people to go back to where they belong. That's the history. I'm like, I'm not in here because I wanted to be around you. That ain't how it happened. We weren't dying to go to Europe. You had rocks. You can't trade with people if all you got is rocks. And basically, that's what they had. They may have had a couple of other things, but basically, that's the truth.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna switch the lane just real quick, and ask you one question, because as Brother Kwame told me that you know nutrition, so you know about nutrition. I'm going to ask you, one, maybe two questions about that, and that's about simple question as far as for Black people.
Mm-hmm.
How can we eat more healthy?
That is a very good question to ask. I want to just say to everybody that the journey on, first of all, I want to encourage everybody to please take this journey into health. Understand this much, that we cannot live without nutrition. We can live without medicine. People have taken themselves off medicine, and I'm not necessarily advocating that you do that. If you're going to do something like that, you got to have a plan. But you cannot live without nutrition. You just cannot. So I want to encourage everybody to please make nutrition central to whatever they do. Now, the brother just asked me, like, what can people do? Brother Tyrone just asked me, what can people do to better their nutrition? I'm going to encourage everybody to start their own journey, and to even put that question. Maybe we can Google it now. When I was coming up, we didn't have Google, so I had to find out the harder way, but still to ask those questions. And maybe one way to begin is, if you are having any ailments that are afflicting you, I will hear a lot of people talking about, oh, my sinuses are bothering me. I will tell you, once I began on my journey with health, which started accidentally, I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go on this journey. Although I always was fortunate enough that I sort of like the foods that you're supposed to eat, like vegetables and fruit. I love that. But start with if there's anything that really is bothering you. And a lot of people talk about allergies, and I used to have allergies all the time. I would be like, my sinuses are bothering me, and I used to take Sudafed, Active, every kind of fed you could think of, and I just thought it was natural. I'm like, oh, well, the seasons change, and this is allergy season, and I have allergies, until something had happened, and I was desperate. My face had broken out so badly, and I was like, oh, I cannot live like this. I had looked like somebody took two black magic markers and wrote down the side of my face. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't live like this. No amount of makeup would take it away or anything. So I was talking to somebody at work, and she goes, why don't you try getting chamomile tea from the health food store? So I said, okay, I'm going to try it. So I go into this health food store, and this person, who happens to be white, by the way, she starts asking me all of these questions. And I'm like, how does she know this? Because every question she was asking me, the answer was yes to. But long story short, she said, why don't you try getting this book called The Yeast Syndrome? So I opened it up right there in the store because I was so desperate. And the remedy was to just change your diet. And I remember saying to myself, well, because I would never experiment with medication. And I said, well, I don't need a doctor to change my diet, and I'm not going to experiment with medication because that's not good to do. So I just began to make all these changes. I made all these changes at once, and I never felt better. But the upshot of that is because I gave up dairy products. When I made those changes, I never had sinuses again. That went away. Mm-hmm. So, and that was, I will go beyond 20 years. I said before, I'm only going to start from 20 years ago, no matter what. So this was about 30 years ago. So I am, like we can say, I'm a couple of years older than 30. But anyway, I never had to buy sinus medication. In fact, I don't even use the word sinuses any longer. I don't even talk like that. It's sinus season. So I would encourage you that if you have any kind of ailment, to just start with doing like a Google search and saying, like, if you have like headaches or migraines or something like that, you can say, put in a search for migraines and then natural modalities, or begin to just research and try to find out if there is something that you can do that can maybe take your migraines away, or if you have issues with heart or lungs. Some of us have asthma. And I can honestly say from my health journey, I believe that the body absolutely can heal, or we might be born with certain conditions. We might be like, if you're born and you don't have the full limb of your arm. I mean, that's just something that you're born with. But we can make anything better. We can physically make anything better, and that's how we should live. And I want to encourage people to enjoy the journey. I want to encourage people to enjoy the journey, and I want to say enjoy the journey with love and grace with yourself, because you might wake up, oh, I'm gonna eliminate cupcakes or something like that. I'm not gonna eat any more sugar, and maybe you'll have sugar later on that day, but have grace with yourself and just understand that nutrition is everything. Nutrition is everything. I encourage people to get some books, do some research, and also, listen to people. But just know that the body can heal. I think that in this country, we have to begin to talk about medical pluralism. And medical pluralism means it's the recognition that there are different systems for healing. So if people want allopathic medicine, which is primarily based on pharmaceutical medicine, if that's what you believe in, then, well, you have the right, if you want to embark upon or go to a hospital or whatever, you can just get an allopathic doctor if that's what you want. But there are other systems of healing too, like traditional African medicines, like Ayurvedic systems of healing. People use traditional Chinese medicine, energy healing. We have the right to say that this is what we want to utilize if we ever find ourselves needing to go to utilize their health system. And insurance companies should recognize that as well. They should recognize that as well, because when we begin to look at things like that and approach things in terms of systems, then we're going to have a different understanding and we will get different results. But I have just witnessed some of the most incredible healing journeys, and I know that the body can heal. The body can certainly get better. If you are able to wake up and to breathe, then there are things that can be done that can make whatever health condition you are experiencing better. And I say that with my full chest, as they say. And as Black people, we must definitely become connected to our traditional knowledge and our traditional medicines. Because I'll tell you this much. The pharmaceutical industry is connected to traditional medicines. It is not the pharmaceutical industry that's buttressing up the continent of Africa or indigenous people. It is our medicines, our plants, and not just with the plants, but with the soil, with so many things like mushrooms and all of that. It is our way of doing things that buttresses and builds up the pharmaceutical industry. Remember what I told you about Bayer and Bayer aspirin?
That's right.
Yeah, remember that.
Mm. Thank you for that. So, if
may I just, I would just like to be able to pull up one thing, if I may.
okay,
I think you would have to. Oh, let me see if I have. Oh gosh, what happened to this window I thought I had up? I think if you could give me the permission to share.
go ahead. Yeah, share.
Right. Let me see if I can. Oh, you have to. It says you disabled participant screen sharing. Are you able?
So I got share it on the joint. All right, hold on. Let me try to work this real quick. Give me 1 second.
I could just share you the link because I just wanted to show you one website.
Hold on. Give me 1 second.
I wish I could send you a request and you could just say yes.
It should be good now. Check now.
Okay, let me try it now. Let me see if I can do this a moment. Okay, now hopefully I can pull this. Hopefully this is going to look right on screen. It has never ever worked when I try to share a screen. But can you see this?
Aspirin, morphine, and chemotherapy, the essential medicines powered by plants.
Right. Does it show up very well on the screen?
Very well.
Okay, good. Now this is a natural history museum, but still, this is just one example. Aspirin, morphine, and chemotherapy, the essential medicines powered by plants. And yet we don't have this information. And we were talking earlier, outside of the stream about spending time outside is good for our physical and mental well-being. But look at this. It says right here, today around 11% of the drugs considered basic and essential by the World Health Organization originated in flowering plants. I think it's even much higher than that.
I think it's much higher too.
Yes. And there are many more from those without flowers, or they're talking about just the flowering plants.
Okay.
Thanks to decades of research, we're able to harness the life-saving powers of superhero plants whose chemical compounds form the basis of powerful drugs that can help combat cancer. Let me just see if I go to here a moment. But that's just one resource. That's just one. And so I just wanted to show people this a moment. But information like that abounds, and it abounds on the NIH website. I want to encourage Black people to become connected to the world of traditional African medicines and to be open anyway. And everybody should be centering our life around nutrition. And I also like to encourage people. It can just sound so self-defeating if you think about, oh my gosh, I have to eliminate all of this stuff that I love. Trust me, I know. If I had my way, macaroni and cheese would be the healthiest thing to eat on the face of the earth. But I ain't the one who created this. But if I created this world, believe you me, macaroni and cheese and ice cream and strawberry shortcake would be the best health foods for you on earth. But I'm like, there's got to be. I'm like, please. But I can tell you right now, there are so many wonderful, healthy alternatives, and I want to encourage everybody to make the healthier choice. And rather than thinking about starting with eliminating everything now, I would say if you had to eliminate something, you should really be thinking about sugar and at least dairy. You'd find that, I think, tremendous benefit in doing that. But oftentimes we crave things because our bodies are starving. We're not getting the proper nutrients that we need. So try to start by thinking that you have to get much more nutrition and much healthier food into your body. Sort of start thinking like that, and maybe start saying, I'm going to just add more greens. I'm going to eat more greens and even raw salads if I can. And also, I just want to say, I also do recognize that poverty is real. Poverty is real in the United States. There is food scarcity. People are hungry, so I don't take that for granted at all. And I just want to say I recognize that that is very real for a lot of our people. So when I'm talking about making healthier choices or trying to eat better, I want to just first of all say I recognize that that's an issue too. And we have to have a world where everybody eats. I really do believe in that. I want a world where everybody eats. Nobody should be starving. Nobody should be having to worry about nutrition or anything like that. No child should go to bed hungry anywhere on earth. And so that's another reason why we have to change this colonialist capitalist system. We must stop settling for things, stop voting because, oh my gosh, I'm so desperate. And you really have you have no reason at all to vote for the Democrats or the Republicans. But the Republicans just don't try to act like there's something they're not. The Democrats tend to the Republicans are much more gangster with their stuff, but the Democrats are gangsters. The Democrats used to be less gangster, but now they're not. They're both of them are evils. Correct. But we have to work to make this world a better world. And when I talk about health at all, I really do. That's always in my mind about, if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't have a home, like if you ask me, like, let's just say we're out someplace and somebody asks me like to buy them soda or my nieces and nephews, I look at them like they got 8 eyes because I'm not buying it for them. I'm like, I'm not getting you that. No. But if it's somebody who is on the streets, homeless, and they're hungry and they're going to ask me to get them something and I say to them, how can I help you? And they're like, well, could you buy me a soda? I'm going to buy them that soda. I'm not going to sit up there and preach to them, oh, you need something healthy. I know that they have that need right now. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to be insensitive to that. So whenever I do talk about health, I just want people to know my heart. That's one of the reasons why I don't preach eating organic. First of all, I can't afford to eat organic. And not that I'm saying that organic is not a good way to go. What I would probably be more comfortable with preaching is learning to grow our own foods, if we could do that, and community gardens where we could provide for our people. But I know people are struggling. I know they are. And we have to create a world where everybody can eat. And you can only eat what you have access to. So yeah, I just have to always say that. I hope I made a little bit of sense with that. But I hate when I will hear people talking about health and all this and nutrition. And yet they just leave out the fact that, well, what do you tell somebody who is hungry? What do you tell somebody who's living on the street? What do you tell them? So I like to try to always have a message. Although I would tell people liquid chlorophyll, if you can get liquid chlorophyll, that's, pretty good that you can utilize. And also vitamin C and vitamin D3. Everybody should take that.
So you said you like to have a message, and thanks for giving us the info on health. What would your message be to a young girl that's watching you right now, or that's trying to come up the ranks and want to go in the path that you have been leading as far as activism and just speaking truth to power? What would you be saying to that girl right now that's watching you?
I would tell them the Black liberation struggle, the Black liberation movement that has always been our social immune system. I would say, make those connections within that. I say that that should be the foundation of our life. That should be for Black people. The Black liberation struggle needs to be the foundation of our life for the Black youth, Black women, and another thing for Black women, especially our young girls coming up. I would hear a lot of people, a lot of, women talk about, some of the things they have experienced. And, domestic violence is real in our communities. I wish it wasn't. And I grew up like with four brothers and, men dominated my family in terms of being the dominant sex in my generation. But yet my relationships with the men in my family, for the most part, were very, very good, very wonderful. I didn't have the situations that I would hear some people talk about. I'm not going to even say that it's all, but some people. Mm-hmm. And it's important for us as young women navigating through this world that we seek a network that can be very supportive of us. When I was out there, I was in a situation all together. There was like 9 men that day when I had that encounter in Millburn, New Jersey. 9 men, 4 or 5 of them berating me like anything, and the other ones doing nothing. And most of them were white, and I'm in this all-white neighborhood. And I thank my Buddhist faith that I'm alive to even tell it, because these were the people that were of the mindset to do some of the horrible things that I saw them, that we know that they did to Sandra Bland. And I was so disconnected at that point because I didn't know anybody. I was fortunate that my brothers, my father, and my mother, my family did come strongly to my support. But you also want to know beyond that. You want to have a network beyond that of people that you can call or that you can at least think, well, for some reason, something happened. They're going to be held to pay. Somebody's going to know that there's going to be held to pay. And that network is just something that we should be connected to. And also, you will just find, I think, just some of the most solid people I have found within the Black liberation struggle. And the way that I would find it is I would just go to things. I would just, I would hear about certain things going on in the community, and I would just tend to go because I wanted to hear, what people were saying. Many times I would just be silent because they say don't ask any stupid questions. And they say there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I do agree with asking questions, but another truism is that stupidity can't come out of a closed mouth. That's my thing. And what I would do many times, I'm like, I'm just going to go and I'm just going to listen, because I knew I didn't really have anything to really add to the conversation. I didn't feel that I did. So I would just go and I would just listen. I would just be quiet many times. And I found that people thought I was very intelligent when I would be quiet. I'm like, where did they get that from? I didn't say anything, but maybe because they just felt my presence listening. So just show up, and you will find that I just think you will meet some of the most solid people in the world. There's going to be issues with people no matter what, but you're also going to have another view of the world that will help you and help you navigate the crap that you're going to run into, because you're going to run into the crap.
So let me get you out of here on this question right here. And okay. I want you to seriously think about, you don't have to seriously think about this, but when it's all said and done, right? When the dust is settled, smoke is clear, what do you want to be known for? What do you want your legacy to be?
I just want to live a righteous life. I just want things to be better than what they are now. So it's not even so much about me, but it's about, I used to always ask myself, if I had been on them plantations, if I had been enslaved, what would I have done? Because, I think we all like to think, well, man, if I was on that plantation and they came up to me, I'd be, I would fight back. So I used to, when I was young, I used to always ask myself that question: what would I do? How would I have handled this? If somebody's whipping me, if I'm looking at a child of mine or my family, what would I do? Or how would I have responded if I was, living during the time of King or people in the 30s or whatever? What would I have done? And of course, I can't really answer that question, but there's another, on one level I can't answer, but there's another way I can answer it. I can't judge what I would have done back then, but I can look at what I'm doing today. And there's a saying in Buddhism that if you want to know what your life was like in the past, look at what you're doing today. And if you want to know what your life will be like in the future, look at what you're doing today. I want a better world, and I just would like it to be said that I try, and I try not to be a hypocrite, no matter what, that I wasn't going to be a hypocrite. I was going to try to do the right thing, at least around things that really matters, life or death things, issues around war and issues in my community. I want to think that I like to think that I like to think that I didn't take no stuff when it came to issues of racism. I like to think that, but and if you ever do, because there have been times and I've been like, oh my gosh, I should have said this. But let me just tell you the importance of doing that, the importance of having those conversations with yourself. Because there have been times when I was in situations that I wasn't expecting and something happened and I'm like, not a lot of times, I'm going to be clear about that. Not a lot of times, but there have been those times and I would be like, oh my gosh, why didn't I say something? Why didn't I do this? But here's the benefit of having those conversations with yourself, because then you will go over certain scenarios in your head about what you shouldn't have done. And you're like, I wish I would have said this. And it will make you start to begin to practice in your head saying that. And I will tell you this much, because you will probably run across a situation like that again. And this time you're going to find yourself being prepared. You're going to find yourself doing it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I learned that because I didn't even realize that would happen. But I learned that when I would say that, oh, I wish I would have done this. I could have, should have, would have. Then, because usually another situation will arise, then I find myself in the way that I wish I would have acted before. So I will say that. Mm-hmm. And have grace with ourselves, people. We've come through a whole lot. And even when you hear me talking harshly about voting and the Black community not getting it right, the boomer generation, do not follow the boomer generation. We are leaving a worse world for our people than we should be leaving. But I say this out of love. I say this out of love so that we can make the corrections. And when we make the corrections, we got to make the corrections. We do them with love. We do them with loving ourselves, with understanding. We've been through hell. It's been a hell of a ride. We make the corrections with love. That's what we do. We own up to it. Like I did it. I said, I'm never going to vote for the Democrats again. I had to do it. I was voting for them no matter what. Boom, boom. But I had to do it. I made a lot of corrections. I don't mind saying that. I don't mind talking about. I believe when the Central Park jogger case and that case first happened, I believed the papers. How could I have done that? I do not know. But I did. I believe the papers. I'm like, they did it. They did it. They did it. I wasn't one of the people out in New York City, trying to lynch them. But I was like, they did it. They did it. They did it. I'll never forget this guy that I knew. He said that day when he heard about it, they didn't do it. I'm like, yeah, they did. They did. They did. I learned I was wrong and I owned up to it. And I've even had the chance to tell them that, because I don't want nobody thinking that I'm something that I'm not. And I told every one of them that I've had the chance to meet, I told them that. I told their mother that. You'll even see on my Facebook page where I talk about that, because that was a correction and an adjustment I needed to make. And I want people to know that, yeah, when you make a mistake, you just make the adjustment and you own up to it. And I'm glad to say that I did find out the truth long before Marty's Reyes confessed. And the way that I found out the truth was I got involved with the Black liberation struggle. And then I was around people and I heard the lawyers talking the truth. So that's how I did it.
Thank you for that. Ms. Lisa, I appreciate you for taking the time out of your schedule, coming on here on my small platform and just bringing so much knowledge and truth and history and making me look at things from a different perspective. And, it's definitely been a blessing.
Thank you. And I appreciate you. And you don't have a small platform. You got a platform.
Thank you.
Me, I got like 2 followers on Facebook, and I'm thankful for them. I'm like, ooh, I got two followers on Facebook, maybe a little bit more on TikTok, but not a whole lot. But no, it's about the power in your platform, and I appreciate this. But your platform's not small.
I thank you for that. I truly thank you for that. I appreciate you. And I'm gonna have you on here again so we can discuss some other different things, coming up, because you definitely a breath of fresh air. And I love hearing you kicking, your knowledge and everything on different things that I didn't even look at it from different, in those ways, or didn't even think about those things at all, and you bring it to light on here. So I appreciate you. 1,000%.
And one more time, come to, first of all, you should check out the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. But also, November 4th, come to Washington, D.C., November 4th, 2023. Oh, we got a message. This is our 15th annual Black People's March on the White House. We deliberately chose November. And next year, I hope it's right before the elections. I'm going to make sure that our march is right before the election because I want to deliver a message to them Democrats, all of them. We are not playing. We are not going to continue to do this. We are talking about community control over our own people. So be there, yes. And it's the Black People's March on the White House, but it's for anybody who wants to stand up for justice and wants to speak out against what's going on. We have to stop these wars. We want reparations. We want it all.
We want it all. We want it all. That's it. Not a little. We want it all. Yes. November 4th, Washington, D.C. This year. Make sure you're there.
Be there. Be there. I'll see you there too.
That's right. You're going to see me there for sure. Yes. So thank you for coming on my platform. Again, breath of fresh air. And I'll see you soon for sure. And thank you guys for watching this video.
Yeah, thank you.
Peace and love.